Greetings, everyone. This is Ohio Dan. This is the second part to a video that I made about how, for the most part, people tend to be slaves to their biology. And despite all this rhetoric and these ideas that are thrown around that people can rise above their basic emotions and desires and do the right thing or do the logical thing, for the most part, that's not what happens. Not with most people in circumstances that are often vital, that actually matter. People choose their base desires. People basically want to eat, drink, have sex, have companionship, make money, and have shelter, and so forth. And that's primarily what's always going to motivate people pretty much, at least for the foreseeable future. And to pretend like that's not the case or people are really motivated by these higher virtues, that's dangerous because it doesn't reflect human nature. And a lot of people don't want to seem to acknowledge this. So that is one unfortunate feature of human nature, in other words, is that no matter what advancements we make technologically or in terms of civilization, we change very little about our biological identity. We are basically the creatures that we were thousands of years ago, just in a different environment, is another way of putting this. And so while our environment may improve, because of all this, our essence as a species doesn't necessarily follow suit. We don't really improve, the environment does, or you could say that the environment is just different. In some ways it's improved, and in some ways maybe not. And that's what I'm going to get into with this video, is the application of all this. Why does it matter? What kind of results are we seeing when it comes to taking human beings for what they are and putting them in this advanced society with all kinds of technology, all kinds of changes from our natural environment, and what's the result of this stark contrast compared to how humans lived thousands of years ago when our overall mental wiring has not changed much. In other words, as a result of what I've just mentioned, we get into trouble when our biological desires, as I mentioned in the previous video, don't mesh well with our new circumstances. They don't mesh well with the high level of technology, the lifestyles that we have available to us today. Our nature and our environment just don't work the way that they ought to. What happens in these situations? I believe that the further removed we become from our natural environment, no matter how much of an objective improvement we may make in that environment in some respects, the harder it will become to make society function reasonably well. These basic desires that we used to go after in ways that were violent, in ways that were not very nice. The Hobbesian version of human history, pretty much, of the state of nature, things were not very good in terms of lifespan, or only the men that could basically take the women by being superior in terms of physical strength would have the chance to reproduce, although in some ways we're kind of approaching that again, but that's not the issue that I want to discuss here. The overall situation would not have been good, but it would have been more in line with our nature. It would have been very straightforward in many cases to get food or water or shelter, and if you didn't have those things and couldn't obtain them, you have to take them from someone else, basically. It would be your tribe versus another tribe. That's not a good life, but it was very consistent with our natural impulses. Today, we have this super complex society in many senses, but yet it's not as clear how to actually try to get our needs met in many cases. And the result is kind of a mess. So as this progresses, it becomes harder for a society to function well. When we're no longer in tune with who we are, especially looking at the masses of people. Again, keeping in mind that most people are basically slaves to their biology, to their base desires, then how are those people going to react in an environment where you can't just go club Og over the head and take his stuff because you will go to prison? How do you react in an environment where you have the state mitigating relationships between men and women and really playing favorites to a large degree in that scenario? How are you going to see things develop when people are expected to work hard, but then they're not really making enough money to get by and get their basic needs met? How are people going to react in that situation? To a large extent, it's not going to be good. And that could happen for a number of reasons. But as we get away from our natural state and into this more complex state, you're going to see more screwed up results. You're going to see people expressing their basic goals or needs based on their biology in a way that is skewed, in a way that is warped. And that's why you see a lot of the stuff that we have going on today in terms of the political movements and what you're supposed to accept as normal and all that kind of stuff. But you just see people behaving in ways that are just clearly not consistent with their nature anymore because they don't understand what their nature even entails. And so I think all this is exacerbated when we are increasingly unaware of what natural human tendencies entail in the first place. Whereas if we had a better knowledge overall about basic human psychology and what motivates people, we could better compensate for the complexities of modern society now. In other words, it's not just that things are more complex, it's that we teach people a bunch of nonsense about who women are and men are. We teach people nonsense about race. We teach people nonsense about all kinds of different political ideologies that are not consistent with human nature. And when I say race, I mean things like understanding tribalism. That would be knowledge of human nature as it applies to race. Oh, the reason why race is something that motivates people is because it used to be that it would be one tribe versus the other, and you would be on the team that basically looks like you because you'd be genetically related against the other tribe that probably doesn't look like you. That really is the core basis of race. That's why some people are racist, is that they don't realize that, okay, maybe that shouldn't be something that we use in this modern society to determine whether we like someone or not. Maybe we need to leave that in the past and at least be cognizant of this so that we don't have basically racist attitudes. I know it sounds like I'm talking kind of from a lefty perspective politically there, but I'm not. It's just a very simple thing. You teach people that that's where this comes from, and that's not something that's really relevant today, so you want to try to put that to the side. With men and women are equal to each other the same way that apples and oranges are equally fruit. Sure, you can say that an apple is just as much of a fruit as an orange. That doesn't tell you anything about the nature of those different fruits. And if you try to make an orange pie, it's going to taste like shit. And that's basically where we are in society today in terms of the gender experiment in that sense. Men and women are so different that when you teach them that they're the same, you get these messed up results where women think that they can do it all themselves and then they can't, and then they blame men for it. And men try their best to navigate the world, and they end up getting themselves in trouble by getting with a woman that makes an accusation against him, or they end up going through the divorce court and learning about how corrupt the system is. Or guys basically that are basically the alpha males or something close to that, they have looks or money, they get all the women, and so they have no incentive to settle down. See, we're not channeling male nature and female nature in such a way that reflects on what we actually can do to truly help each other, to actually have reciprocal relationships between men and women. And traditionalism was never a perfect system, but to some degree it had that going on. Traditionalists understood the potential darker aspects of male and female nature and tried to compensate for that by having a system that made sense, that controlled these darker things, these impulses to just have sex with a bunch of women and get them pregnant, not take care of kids basically. Or on the other end, the woman constantly just goes off with a bigger, better deal, or she sleeps with one man and then finds beta bucks. All of those things were discouraged in the past because we realized that human nature, again, people don't rise above it for the most part. People act in these kinds of ways all the time. And so you've got to curtail it. You've got to restrict the potential negative outcomes by basically having negative consequences for taking these sorts of actions. And now it's just this really messed up, men are always bad no matter what they do, women never have to take accountability no matter what they do, and we're all just supposed to basically get along with that somehow, and men just need to man up and take it, basically, and just get married anyway, right? That might be an oversimplification in some ways, but that's largely where we're at. and we don't even acknowledge the differences between men and women anymore. That's the type of thing that I'm talking about here. So many issues that we face today, from lacking a basic understanding of our biology, whether it's men's biology, women's biology, to not understanding what psychologically motivates us as humans, stem from this disassociation with our natural environment and placement into a complex, highly technological world for which we are not necessarily well suited, and then we are not equipped to even understand where things are. We're not told the truth about more or less where we come from, our origins, the sort of things that motivate us, and if we choose to rise above those things, what we can do. Instead, we're just basically encouraged to engage in these base desires, and it's warped in such a way that it doesn't benefit anybody, right? It's warped in such a way that society facilitates degenerate behavior, more or less. These basic desires are coming out in a way that are far removed from optimal, that really are not at all what you would get with a well-functioning society. And so, eventually, if things continue as they are in modern society, particularly in the West, kind of in the world in general, it's likely that we will become too far removed from anything consistent with our natural characteristics as humans, to the point where it contributes to major problems and the potential collapse of society. In other words, none of this is sustainable. When you have these messed up views of what working hard but being rewarded with that for something that allows you to have the resources to get by in life, what that actually looks like, versus being a wage slave and never getting ahead. When you have people that constantly are involved in things like identity politics and this oppressor versus oppressed narrative, sure, you could take advantage of people's tribalism, for example, to do that. You could warp people's desire to have companionship and be accepted. You could warp all of that, but it's going to create negative results. It's going to create a mess later on down the road, and we're headed straight toward that because people don't have an understanding of, okay, I'm motivated by these basic things, and here's what I might do as an individual to be logical and objective despite being motivated by these things. Here's what I can do as an individual to be a morally decent person despite these things that are always going to have an effect because it's part of my human nature. Instead, it's just lies on top of lies, and then human nature comes out anyway in a way that is far more fucked up than if people knew what they were trying to do in the first place, if that makes sense. If people knew what their goals were in a way that respected our nature, but that also made an attempt, at least for the people that could do this, to have virtue or have logic be the basis of what they do. Again, most people won't do this. Most people will just continue to go along with their base desires, but even that has to be channeled into something that's functional. And that's pretty much the opposite of what our society is doing today, in my opinion. So as people become further ignorant of what it means to be human at an essential level, we will see more strange consequences that could further accelerate the decline and dysfunction of society. We should maintain an awareness of the potential results of this phenomenon. We should realize that this is one of these things that's causing society to unravel. I don't know that there's anything we can do about it. As Stardust has mentioned, we could educate people in theory on what men want, what women want. Again, what tribalism is and how that plays a role in race. We could be honest with people about how most people are just going to try to have their basic needs met, and that's the core reasoning, if you want to call it that, behind people's behavior, even if there's not much reasoning involved in a lot of cases at all. People want to be able to eat, sleep, have water, have access to sex, or some way of relieving that desire at least, and basically to continue with their daily lives. People are more motivated by that than anything else, if we're being honest, right? That's the red pill here. But the application in a society where we don't even acknowledge what these basic interests and desires are when it comes to human nature, men and women, and so forth, that is where things get more dangerous. That is where things continue to unravel at an accelerated rate, in my opinion, because we can't even be honest about what these core ideas are. We can't even define what men and women are anymore. We can't even define in any sort of intellectually honest way what actually motivates people. We can't be honest about people really only work so that they can get resources. We can't really be honest about the idea that male sexuality is basically weaponized today. And it's weaponized in a way that men are starting to figure out in some cases, but it's not going to have a good result unless we actually encourage men and women to have some form of social contract with each other again. And instead, it's just this you will work for nothing attitude toward men. We can't be honest about basic human motivations and what they entail, and instead we have this fantasyland version of how things should proceed, and in my opinion, it's not going to proceed well. And that's the point of me talking about this red pill, that not only are most people basically slaves to their basic biology, they're not going to be objective, they're not going to be logical, they're not going to think things through in many cases in terms of what's the right thing to do. People will mostly act based on their instincts and their programming, and then you don't program them right. You don't even allow them to know what it is that they really are motivated by. You tell women that they can be the boss and that they can dominate men, and then they're not attracted to those men because that's not what they want. You tell men that they always need to do better and work harder, and there's never really a reward for that, especially if you're not one of the better looking men in society. And so men get fed up with that and get pissed off at that as well. It doesn't end well if we continue to move things in this direction. And I think we need to be aware of that, because not having this compatibility between human nature and society, and then not even being aware that that incompatibility is present, and just denying what motivates people in general, men, women, people of every race, what motivates us in general, regardless of a lot of these other factors, if we can't be honest about that and even acknowledge it, and we have all these things screwing with people's minds in terms of how they can pursue what motivates them without even them being aware of it consciously, that's not going to lead to anything good. And things are going to continue to get more messed up in this society as a result, in my opinion at least. And I think we should be aware of that, because this is not going to get fixed if people really don't even understand that not only are most people going to react and do things based on trying to have their basic needs met, but they're not even told how to pursue those basic needs. And so it's going to be channeled into things that are pretty warped in the future. I think we need to be aware of that, knowing that that's going to be one of the factors that causes society to continue to decline, in my opinion.